What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So now that we're a couple of days into the playoffs, pressure is starting to mount, especially if you're down 2-1 like the Toronto Maple Leafs, down 2-0 like the Dallas Stars, or even if it's tied 1-1, the pressure is starting to ramp up, and especially if these teams have early exits, whether it's a first-round exit if your team wasn't really expected to go on that deep of a playoff run, but even a second-round exit if you're a legit cup contender. Heads are going to roll. Heads are going to roll in terms of the front office and the coaching staff. So I have 8 either head coaches or general managers that I want to go through. Not saying they're 1,000% going to get fired. Some of them I think will. But if they have an early exit this season, they're going to start to heavily get on the hot seat or just outright fired based on expectations, based on what they've done recently. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first one's kind of obvious and probably the number one if his team loses in the first round, he's not going to be there next season. That is Ken Holland of the Edmonton Oilers. It's not really a firing considering this is the last year of his contract, but if the Edmonton Oilers don't even make it to the Western Conference Finals, especially with this Demko news, Ken Holland's not going to be there. Ken Holland has a very bipolar track record in Edmonton because for every Zach Hyman signing, RNH extension, that's fantastic, only like $5.2 million. There's an equally bad Darnell Nurse deal, Jack Campbell deal. So he's just been, he's not squandered completely Connor McDavid or Draisaitl, but their teams should be like far and away the best teams in the entire NHL when you have Connor McDavid on $12.5 million and Leon Draisaitl only making $8.5. They should be at the top every single season. So the fact that they've only made one Western Conference Finals appearance and they didn't even win a game in that Western Conference Finals back in 2022, if they don't make it to at least the conference finals, you cannot run it back with Ken Holland. I think that he's done very good at the last 2 deadlines. With the Ekholm deal was fantastic. Most recently, Adam Henrique, pretty solid deal. But I don't think you can trust this guy given his track record in Edmonton if they don't go on a very deep run. Next up, Peter DeBoer of the Dallas Stars. Yes, it's only year 2 for him in Dallas, but this isn't some coach that's young, that's growing with these players. He's already had 3 different stops, being the New Jersey Devils, Vegas Golden Knights, San Jose Sharks, and I think I'm forgetting, he coached in Anaheim, I want to say was his first stop. Don't quote me on that. I'll throw it up right now or something like that. But when looking at him, he's had high-level teams of late. The New Jersey Devils team helped lead them to a Stanley Cup final, San Jose Sharks in 2016. But since then, he has not really been able to get over the hump. I think he's only made one. He made one conference final with Vegas. This guy is an experienced coach. You expected to bring him in to help you go on deep playoff runs. So if in year 2, you make the Western Conference Finals the first year, and then in year 2, you get out in the first round, even though you're playing a great Vegas Golden Knights team, I think if you're Jim Nill, you got to put the guy at least heavily on the hot seat for next season, maybe even fire him this summer in order to get some of the very intriguing coaching options that are out there, like a Craig Berube, like a Dean Evason, a Jay Woodcroft. I think you would highly have to consider that, considering Peter DeBoer has not been able to get teams over the hump in terms of winning a Stanley Cup or even making the Stanley Cup finals in the last 8 years at this point now, in 2016. So yeah, I think Dallas, maybe not fire him, but he's going to be on one of the hottest seats in the entire league. If they end up losing in the first round, even if they end up losing in the second round, he's going to be on a pretty hot seat in Dallas. Next up, Don Sweeney. There's definitely going to be some pressure if the Boston Bruins lose in the first round. Definitely not nearly as much as those 2 other guys. This was more of a transitional year, but Don Sweeney has been on the job for a very long time now. And although the Boston Bruins have maybe been the best regular season team throughout his tenure, they've been in the playoffs, I think, every single year outside of maybe the first one, cream of the crop. The playoff results haven't really been there. You thought once they made the Stanley Cup final in 2019, you're like, this core is going to win at least one Stanley Cup, without a doubt. Last year, they blow it. He had a very good deadline, but at the end of the day, they do lose to the 8 seed in the first round. So I think if you're looking at Don Sweeney, next year will probably be his make or break year. I don't foresee him getting fired this summer if they lose in the first round to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I think next year, again, this was more of a retool year. Next year, they have a lot of salary, a lot of cap space to spend. I think if they end up being either a first or second round exit next year, he's probably gone. Maybe I could see them potentially making changes this summer, especially if they blow a 2-1 lead to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Not that likely, though. Another general manager up next. I have Rob Blake of the LA Kings. Now, LA showed some life last night. They're tied 1-1, but I think if they do end up losing to the Edmonton Oilers in any form of fashion, you got to look at this guy, the fact that the last 3 years they've been a first-round exit, although they've unfortunately got matched up against the Edmonton Oilers. his most recent year was not that good. He traded a decent amount. I'd rather have Gabe Velarde right now than PLD, let alone the other assets and second round pick that they ended up giving up. He gave that disastrous contract, and as a result, LA was pretty limited in terms of what they could have done at this year's deadline. They end up not doing anything at all. So although I do like the Rob Blake tenure on a whole, he made some very good moves, like the Victor Arvidsson trade, like the Fiala trade, even though that was kind of a win-win for both sides, considering Minnesota got Faber. Maybe even he lost that a little bit, but still, it was good in terms of win-win. Rob Blake has a lot of pressure on him in order to win in the first round this year. He's been there for a decent amount of years at this point. It wouldn't shock me if LA ends up letting go of Rob Blake if they lose to the Edmonton Oilers in the first round, especially if it's in if it's in 5 games. I don't really know how you bring him back, considering it's gotten worse every single season. Maybe if they go to 6 or 7 games, you keep him. But if you keep him this summer and then they lose again in the first round next year, I don't know how you can possibly keep him. It's definitely a hot seat for Rob Blake right now in LA. Next up, Lou Lamoriello. I don't think that he's going anywhere, but if they end up losing in 4 or 5 games, I don't know how much longer ownership can continue to let this guy kind of chip away at this core. Overall, I've said it multiple times, overall, the Lou Lamoriello tenure in New York on the island has been very successful. It's been the most successful tenure outside of the 80s, outside of the dynasty, but man, it's been downhill since 2021. Since those back-to-back conference finals appearances, it has not been good. The future is looking very bad. If they let Lou Lamoriello continue to run the show without showing any playoff actual success and building a core that we have any belief in to go deep in the playoffs, this team is they're already going to have a very long rebuild ahead, but if he continues to dig deeper, it is going to be ugly in terms of this. So the fact that since the 2022 draft, he's traded so many assets, whether it's the Romanov trade, the Bo Horvat trade, to have not a single playoff series win as a result of that is simply unacceptable. Lou Lamoriello, although I don't think he's probably going to get fired this summer or retire at this point, not even fired, just step down, he's definitely on a hot seat considering we have been so aggressive. And the fact that we took Carolina to 6 last year, if we get swept, that is very not encouraging, and Lou Lamoriello, rightfully so, should be on the hot seat. This next one, I have praised this coach nonstop, and I don't think that he'd get fired, but in terms of a hot seat, I think Rod Brindamour goes on the hot seat if the Carolina Hurricanes, if they lose to the Islanders somehow, if they blow this, he might have to get fired for that offense if they end up losing to the Islanders. But even if they lose in the second round to the New York Rangers, although I think Rod Brindamour is one of the best coaches in the entire league, he can elevate a less talented group. Although Carolina is very talented now, in prior years they really weren't. They were putting up 110 points, making the Eastern Conference Finals. But at this point, if they lose in the second round to the Rangers, you got to start almost believing the narratives that his style of hockey is limited in terms of deep playoff runs. Yes, they can dominate possession against weaker teams, but maybe they just don't have the finishing power to go on these deep playoff runs. He plays too conservative of a system in terms of just rattling off low danger chances from the outside, not getting to the net front. So in looking at Rod Brindamour, fantastic coach. If he gets fired, I hope the Islanders hire him because he'd elevate us to actually safely making the playoffs. But when you're looking at Rod Brindamour, the results have not been there with this team that has basically been cup or bust for the last 3 to 4 years. If they end up losing to the New York Rangers, he's definitely on the hot seat. Would he get fired? I don't think so, but I'm not sure how many times you can run it back with Rod Brindamour, who plays such a distinct style of hockey. It's not like he's just some cardboard cutout of every single other coach. He plays a distinct style. So if the postseason results just continue to not be there, at some point you got to change something up. That's not meaning that Rod Brindamour is a bad coach, but you just maybe need some change in terms of winning a Stanley Cup. 7th, Sheldon Keefe, obviously, probably should get fired, probably will get fired if they end up losing to the Boston Bruins, even though actually the William Nylander thing might save his job, William Nylander's injury. But when looking at it, he's not Brad Treliving's guy. Brad Treliving obviously inherited Sheldon Keefe as his head coach. He got hired a little bit later, Treliving, so he wasn't going to restart the coaching process, and Keefe had another year on his deal, and Keefe also got extended. I don't think that's a major problem. Toronto's ownership is massively rich. They can fire him whenever they want. They fired Babcock with an obscene amount of money left on his deal. So when looking at Sheldon Keefe, I think if Brad Treliving, if there's a first-round exit in 6, even 7 games, I think he'd want his own guy. Sheldon Keefe is very much a Kyle Dubas guy. He coached with the Marlies when Dubas was the Marlies AHL guy. Sheldon Keefe was a Marlies AHL guy. I can't speak right now, but he's a Sheldon Keefe guy. Brad Treliving owes absolutely nothing to Sheldon Keefe. So even with this extension, it's not some massive deal. I think Sheldon Keefe probably will get fired. Despite all the regular season success, he did inherit a fantastic core. I think that's over-exaggerated when Leafs fans were like, he has the greatest regular season win percentage of all time. Yeah, he walked into a fantastic situation with 3 superstar level players. So I think Sheldon Keefe probably needs to get fired if they end up losing in the first round. It's been that this will be his 5th postseason run with the team. I know the COVID 2019-2020 season, he didn't have a full season with the team, but still 5 years and only 1 series win and some embarrassing series losses during that, like Columbus. They technically didn't even make the playoffs back in 2020, given the play-ins. Embarrassing loss to Columbus, embarrassing loss to Montreal. I think you got to move on from Sheldon Keefe if they end up losing in the first round. And then lastly, I got Chris Drury on this. I don't think that he'll get fired, but the hot seat will be hot, especially if they lose to Carolina in the second round. When looking at it, Don Waddell beat out Chris Drury in order to get Jake Gensel. They were the 2 rumored teams. So if the Carolina Hurricanes and Jake Gensel absolutely balls out in that series, Ranger fans are going to be calling for Drury's head. And similarly to Ken Holland, Drury has far more wins than losses, but he does have some pretty bad losses like the Barclay Goodrow trade, the Pavlovich Never trade, but that was a lot at the start of his tenure. I think Chris Drury, he's only been there for 3 years, but there definitely will be some pressure. If they lose to Washington somehow this year, big time pressure. Peter Laviolette obviously has no pressure. It's his first year, led them to the President's Trophy. But when looking at Chris Drury, probably not fired unless they lose to Washington. That might cause some change. But I think if he loses to Carolina, there's like a 20% chance, 25% chance that he could get fired. But then next season, if they don't make at least the Eastern Conference Finals, we could see Chris Drury potentially getting fired. So when looking at it, yeah, I only think like Holland, DeBoer, Blake, Keefe have like realistic chance, like decent chances if they lose in the first or second round. The rest, the hot seat is going to ramp up exponentially if they lose early. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about this? Do you think any of these guys are going to get fired? There's been so many coaching changes in the goddamn NHL this season. But let me know in the comments, what do you think? I'll be seeing the next one.